Okay, cool. Thanks everyone for coming. This is the third meeting of the real-time working group. Yeah, so we have a few items on the agenda, a few updates from the last meeting. So yeah, progress on the issues. If we use our existing Helm charts, we get a lot of our service discovery stuff with that. So, and I think we mentioned in the last meeting that we would reuse our existing Redis nodes um, as opposed to provisioning new ones, and then we'll provision new ones if we need to do that, in which case we can probably reuse a lot of our Helm charts as they are. They currently support one Redis deployment, so if we want to add more, we'll have to do more substantial updates to the Helm charts.
But uh, I think this would be a problem though, because I just read the issue, and I guess our Helm charts are the one used to deploy our current Kubernetes pods, right, for Sidekick export and stuff. So right now it's configured to connect to our Sidekick Redis instance, and then we were planning to reuse our shared state instance instead of not the Sidekick instance. So we'd have to have a way to configure multiple instances then if we wanted this to work. Unless we reuse the Sidekick instance because our Kubernetes pods are already connecting to that. But
yeah, I'm not sure if we have anyone on the call who can answer this, but what are the implications of reusing the Sidekick ones?
I'm not sure if it's like, if there's like lesser headroom there or something, or is it more critical that we don't want to touch that or something. But yeah, the initial plan was reusing the shared state one.
I think we
I think
kind of
Sean would know more.
yeah, Sean mentioned last time like a good first milestone would be to deploy something to staging and to see it there. So again, like if we're considering like provisioning potentially in the future, provisioning new Redis nodes anyway, and we're going to feature flag this pretty heavily, maybe we can reuse those Sidekick nodes.
I don't exactly remember the reason, but my impression was that it's really more for because it makes for a cleaner separation of concerns. Because I would imagine I actually have no prior experience with running WebSockets in production, but I would imagine the workload is very different, and the unit of work that's being executed is very different in like a batch job versus something that requires maintaining state for real-time user interaction on the site. So I think there's something to be said about, if one thing goes down, you don't want the other thing to go down with it, because these are very, very different workloads from the application perspective. So I think just from, not even from a technical perspective, but just from a kind of clean architecture perspective, I think it would make a lot of sense to keep those things separate.
Yeah, the problem that we've been having, I think, so far with this is that there are a lot of dependencies on other teams, if you like, or really just on other disciplines, right? So we kind of need to trim as much as possible to get to something that we can see, even if we can't necessarily release it to customers yet. There'd be some value in us being able to, like you said, measure the impact of having WebSocket connections, maintaining those connections on a known quantity of issues or known quantity of users. So yeah, like fully agreed that potentially like down the line we like an elegant separation of responsibilities, like it's ideal. It's a case of like what can we get to now, managing the dependencies on other teams, and other teams have a lot of work, and particularly the delivery team who are already focused on delivering Sidekick.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And just to be clear, I think that's why the suggestion was to use the shared cluster, so as to keep it separate from production Sidekick, but like not having to spin up a new Redis cluster just for WebSockets, at least not yet. Yeah.
Sure. Heinrich, do you want to give an update on the application progress so far?
Yeah, so I've been working on getting our development setup to work. So GDK MRs, while also working on the Omnibus MRs to update configuration so that our web and API nodes would be able to connect to the right Redis node, whatever Redis node we choose in the future. And then, so yeah, the workhorse MR is also merged because everything needs to go through workhorse, and then we'd have to, it doesn't have existing support for WebSockets on, it has existing support, but only on certain routes. So we had to add another route there. So yeah, that's done. Now the next part would be working on the Rails MR once these are merged. So because I mean, it's already there, but I didn't push it for review and for merge because it's hard to get it tested and everything without a GDK working. So once we have the GDK MR merge, it's easier to have this, like, you can now boot up GDK and enable the feature flag and actually see the feature working without having to, have a long list of instructions, switch your workhorse branch to this, switch your GDK branch to this, switch your. So yeah, once that's done, it will be the ops things now, like Dockerization and all that mentioned below, and Omnibus for deploy.
So bearing in mind the original goal of the group was to ship a real-time feature to self-hosted customers. With the Omnibus work and the GDK work as well, I know it's behind a feature flag, but technically somebody could draw down the work, right? Or and lift the feature flag and see the feature working, right?
In GDK for now, if the GDK MR gets merged. In Omnibus, I just had the MR for configuring cable.yaml, which is the sending part of WebSockets. Like when an issue gets updated, it knows when to send to publish messages. The subscribe part, it needs a Puma server. That's what we kind of decided, like a separate Puma server to run the WebSocket server. And I have to have another Omnibus MR to like start that for self-hosted customers.
So at the minute, the server will handle the upgrade request to upgrade the connection, but it won't.
It won't even handle the upgrade request because unless we have that Omnibus MR to start a Puma server to yeah, so it just goes nowhere.
Okay, cool. From the ops and delivery side, there were a few comments that I thought were interesting on our issue in the delivery team's project. So yeah, John Scarbeck came in and mentioned that we pretty much get a lot of metrics if we use the Prometheus exporter, which is built into all the clusters currently. We just have to integrate with that and we can start collecting metrics about connections and things like that. So yeah, and then also we've added some other members to the working group. I don't want to call anyone out, so if you don't have any concerns, like feel free to ignore. But Matthias, you mentioned that you might have some concerns around memory usage and things like that. Do you want to vocalize anything?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not entirely caught up yet on the discussions leading to now, but I mean, like our team has an interesting challenge in that with every feature that we new add, of course, we typically increase the application footprint and the resources consumed. And of course, we're trying to move into a position where at some point we get a better grasp of like what that means in terms of cost as well for our customers to run. Actually, today we have like a first meeting to talk about what the North Star is going to be for our team. So we're a fairly newly formed team. So right now we're still trying to stay on top of what's happening at GitLab and seeing like where things move. I guess what's on my mind right now is if I'm a self-managed customer and maybe I run a very simple GitLab deployment, maybe it's a single node deployment. I will have to pay the extra cost here, right? For a new, at least a separate process that's being spun up, paying with memory for in compute for the cost of a entire Rails process over again. So I guess I'm just wondering, like, is that something we're okay with, or because that's still a substantial addition to the existing memory footprint, or is this something where, is there a way to maybe even degrade it gracefully to where if I choose to not configure real-time editing or something, that we could just fall back to the previous behavior or something. So these are kind of things on my mind where I'm thinking maybe there are users who are not power users who are not maybe benefiting that much from real-time editing, or maybe are not interested in paying the extra resources consumed to use that feature. I honestly don't know at this point if there was any research being done into that, how, like, what kind of user cohorts would be heavily using this kind of feature. And I mean, like, outside of GitLab.com, like really more focused on self-managed customers. And so I guess those are my main things on my mind right now, rather than specifically optimizing for, oh, hey, we will run like an extra node or like an extra process at the least, and then looking at kind of how can we like micro optimize that, but more in general about, like, have we thought about maybe making this opt-in, or at least let it degrade gracefully to the existing functionality for customers who might not benefit from this as much.
What's your view, Heinrich? I think, like, can a customer switch it off with the current proposal, like, or just opt out if they don't want to spin up a separate Puma server, don't want to pay the memory cost if they're happy enough with the first feature? Like, the first feature is so Matthias, the first feature is going to be to upgrade assignees in real time. If it degraded to, like, if we had a fallback, it would literally be just what happens now, which is nothing. So that would be the experience for the user. So I think it degrades gracefully, right, to current behavior. But I'm just wondering, Heinrich, can you switch it off or opt out?
I think it's ultimately a product question. If we want to support these, like GitLab Lite or something like that, like some features disabled, or yeah. And I also like commented on the issue that we have a possible solution to like lower the memory footprint is to like run the WebSocket thread pool in the same Puma process, because it supports that setup. I mean, we just decided not to do this because we wanted more isolation as the first iteration, but it's an option that we can go for in the future to be more like lighter on the memory side for self-hosted customers. And yeah, I think it's for the real-time sidebar, because this is ultimately part of the real-time sidebar thing. I think it's fine that you can turn it off. I mean, it kind of works even if it's broken. If the WebSocket server is broken, it just works like it is now. But the plan is to build more features on top of this. Like, I think the Create team is planning like a real-time editor, and those are more like real features versus like enhancements that we are trying to do right now. So I don't know. I mean, it's ultimately a product thing, I think.
I mean, this isn't going to be the most helpful way of putting it, but as like a devil's advocate position, like, imagine that we had GitLab without any background job processing, and we were adding background job processing for one thing that was optional. We would say that, like, maybe you can turn that off, but then background job processing becomes sort of fundamental to GitLab, and we just have to include it. Like, I think that's sort of where this is going. Like, if we have real-time features, then some of those will just simply not work in the same way that GitLab won't work if you turn off JavaScript, or if you turn off background processing, or if you turn off GitLab shell or something like that. Like, these are just sort of fundamental components that, like, at right now you can turn them off, but I think the end state is something where that's just integral to the product, right?
Yeah, and one thing I think we have to be careful about is like supporting multiple variations of our product. It's going to be like extra work to support these setups. So
yeah, these are super fair points, and I totally understand. It's like a little bit of like a team internal struggle as well that we might have, that we kind of test with, keeping the memory footprint low, but at the same time, we're often moving directions with the company where we want to broaden and to deepen our features at the same time. So it's something we have to figure out as a team as well. But yeah, so this was the first thing I was thinking going to this. But it sounds like we're very much aligned around this. Looks like a really promising technology to deploy and then build interesting features on top. And that we might even, if that works well, we might even expand on this going forward. I mean, that's great. If we think this is the direction we want to take, then of course then we should focus on how can we deliver this in the most efficient way. Yeah, so I appreciate the comment.
I can add something from Create Static Site Editor team, because I've been joining their brainstorming session when they were deciding on the architecture of the application. And partly they decided to adopt GraphQL because they really need real-time updates, and they hope for subscriptions to be there. I mean, it's not hoping for like the closest time, but they're building it on top of GraphQL because they really need real-time updates. So yeah, this is much needed.
When it comes to features like real-time collaborative editing and things like that, those are things could possibly, I don't know what the plan is for those, but could end up in higher tiers, let's say. When it comes to real-time assignees and the sidebar, it's something that's most likely going to be of interest to, most. It's almost a quality of life improvement for the product. I suppose that's where it becomes, maybe a question for people like, do I, if I am running the open version of the product, should I have to run twice the infrastructure now for a feature I don't care that much about? Anyway, yeah, so I'd like to get an idea of any blockers to work that we have in progress. Ultimately, like we said last week, we want to take on more of this work in the team, even in the plan team, for infrastructure work that we can do. But yeah, it would help to get an idea of what's stopping progress at the minute. Maybe Heinrich, maybe it'd be best to suggest.
Yeah, I think with the back end that we have right now, we could even start with the Dockerization and the Helm charts thing. I was planning to start looking into it. Like I was just starting looking to like tutorials and stuff, but because I don't know anything about them. Yeah, so I don't know if somebody wants to own those, or like, because I think they're ready to be started on.
Yeah, I thought containerization at least pretty much has to be done before we start working with the Kubernetes deployment, right? So yeah, that's my main ask for this meeting, to be honest, is can we get a DRI for each of these things, and anything else that you think would be blocking? Doesn't mean you have to do the work, just means that you would assist with whoever is doing it, bring it back to the working group and let us know of progress. So I've put the things in there. Does anyone want to jump in and take
I'm happy to like help coordinate the Helm chart stuff because I've been doing some work on those lately. It is blocked by the you can't use the Helm chart without the application being containerized, like as you said. So I think it would be, but you can very easily like use a container from like a branch, so like a work in progress MR on the build images project to then test out your Helm chart on that one's own branch. So working cross projects there works quite nicely. So yeah, I'm happy to help with the Helm chart side of things, but it is blocked on the Dockerization.
I think it's because Sean is now here. Could we like go back to the first point which he missed? Like we were talking about our charts where it only supported one Redis configuration, and I guess it's now configured to connect to our Sidekick because we're using it for Sidekick. Is this going to be a problem? Do we have to work on this? Is this like?
Sorry, could you say that again? So like the
Yeah, it seems like on that issue it says like we only support one Redis configuration. So do we have to work on this issue for us to work with our action cable pods to connect to a separate Redis instance, which is the shared state one? Or
I assume that this one would only need to talk to the shared state one, but that issue is a little bit concerning to me because I also think Sidekick might need to talk to the shared state one. So I think it might be a bigger problem for Sidekick than it is for this. This is not a guarantee, but off the top of my head, I can't see why these any cable nodes or whatever we're calling them would need to talk to any Redis instance other than the shared state. Is that's what you're saying, right, Heinrich? That they should be okay with just talking to that one instance.
yeah, they should. But I guess my question is like, do our charts support deploying these pods that connect to shared state, or like are all pods in our chart gonna? I'm not sure about
Oh,
the chart.
right. So the way Helm works is you can easily override things on different levels. So I haven't looked at the specific details of this, but I'm pretty confident that, like, assuming it's possible to configure this at a pod level or whichever component level, that we can do that. But I'm going to add it to look at that issue because I think it might be a problem for Sidekick anyway.
Is there a bit more background or context on the Dockerization point? Because that, like, in and of itself sounds like a pretty massive endeavor. Like, I have no idea if we've already started on this or if this is something we had been working on anyway because we're moving to Kubernetes or like.
Well, yeah. So bear in mind we already have images for, Unicorn, Puma, Sidekick. Like, so we have images that will load the entire Rails application in some form and do something with it. In this case, we need an image that does something like that, but not exactly the same as those other images. So I think that's the optimistic view of that, is that, like, it can reuse a lot of that existing work. And it might be wrong, but that's what I'm going with for now.
I did see something while looking into the Docker containers images that we have. Like there was a note, something like a workhorse is still embedded in the Rails image or something. And I'm not sure if that would be an issue for us, or like, do we need to separate workhorse out, or I don't know about that, but because.
I also noticed that the Sidekick container refers to a GitLab Rails EE container that I then couldn't find. I could find a GitLab Rails container, but I couldn't find a Rails EE container. So actually, I think with regards to
these sound like perfect questions for the DRI to go figure out, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So Gabe last week at the last meeting was very keen to get more of the work into the plan team, but in other words, sorry, so the plan team's already working on, and Heinrich's already working on the application work, but we could take more of the work to containerize and deploy. But we can't just have one. We can't just have Heinrich as the DRI for it, because he's also doing the application work. So what I was thinking was, if somebody with experience working on the containerization could be the DRI for it, then we could probably do the work with their help. What do you think?
I'm not sure if anybody in here has that experience, is the only question.
Okay, cool. Well, maybe not. Maybe somebody from the team could be DRI then, but we could refer to somebody in delivery or one of the other teams for help. Sean, I don't know. Like, I mean, I know originally the plan was that you and Ben would be able to take tasks back to the team. So I don't really know where to find somebody who has experience with Docker at the minute.
Yeah, so I think this mostly belongs to the distribution team, and maybe, I don't know, I'm wary of suggesting we just keep expanding the working group, but like all of this stuff is related to the distribution team and what they do. Now, that's not to say that they're the only people who can do this stuff. Like, it's entirely possible for someone else to make a change that's included in Omnibus. They're just like reviewing that and approving it and like providing like the standards and guidance around that. But that's the team that's going to have the most expertise on this. So the other option is to just have someone own it, and they go talk to like potentially the distribution team, or go try and figure stuff out for themselves and see what works and see what doesn't work. I think this is the only working group I've been in, so I don't know which way we prefer to go on that stuff.
Yeah, I don't really mind so long as we can keep it unblocked. So I think what we'll do is, based on, like I said before, Gabe's, I think, prepared to prioritize, say, a containerization task in our backlog, if we can get it well defined, and get maybe more than one person in the team responsible for it. So maybe that's the next step. Then I'll create that issue, and I'll talk to Gabe about getting prioritized. And then Heinrich, maybe we can reach out to people who might have experience Dockerizing.
Just on that non-expert thing, like when we say preparation of the Helm charts, like I've done like a couple of small things in there, so I'm not an expert and I'm owning that one. So I think it's fine for a non-expert to own something.
Okay, cool. Let's say the plan team will own it for now, and we'll see how progress with the issue goes and who comes in to help. Is there anything else that's a blocker that we could use a DRI for? Okay, I'll take that as a no.
Yeah, it sounds like the main issues for now are getting this into a point where we could deploy it somewhere and then start trying to test it, right?
Okay. Yeah. You mentioned last week about getting it to staging.
Yeah, I think that's ideal. That's sort of what the
okay.
delivery team have been doing with Sidekick, and I haven't heard that that's been a problem. So I'm going to assume it was good.
I think it answers a lot of questions about whether we should start with a shared Redis instance or provision a new one. We can just start with a shared one, and then if it's a problem, it's only staging anyway.
Yeah. And we might not find problems in staging, but as long as we can turn it off easily in production, that hopefully isn't an issue either.
Yeah, cool. All right, we're kind of running up against time. I've created an MR for the exit criteria of the working group. The two criteria, as I see them, are to get the feature work done, and then to also get the Kubernetes deployment configured. If you have any suggestions on that, could you please check the issue or the MR and give it an approval if you're broadly in agreement with the steps that need to be done, if you think anything needs to be added. It doesn't correlate exactly with our task lists. It's more of an overview of what needs to be accomplished by the group for us to shut the working group down and call it victory. So yeah, thanks. Does anyone have anything else to add before we end the call? Cool. All right. Thanks everyone for your time. See you again next week.
Thanks.